Last time I started talking about negative space and positive space and how to pay attention to both to not only control the negative space but also control your background and separate the subject from the background. We talked about how this picture at first glance might seem to be okay, but when you do the upside down test you really take a look at the negative space, the space surrounding your subject, which is the positive space, and you realize that these trees can really be distracting. Some might say the branches lead into the subject. I find that the branches or the parts of the tree seem to be growing out of her back and tend to take away from the subject. In this case, maybe the idea is to show how camouflaged the bird is, but that busy background does hide our subject. It doesn't emphasize the subject that well. The upside down test proves that. So usually we're not trying to do a study of camouflage, trying to camouflage our subject or the positive space, but we're trying to have our subject or positive space stand out to become the focal point. All right, this leads us into our next shot on the list, number 8. We're in the element scavenger hunt. Remember, we're using these elements to give more attention to our subjects and to create different principles of design. I'm going to talk about leading lines and eye line. Remember from art class that in perspective drawing there's a vanishing point. Out there in our environment that we take pictures in, there's all kinds of lines, and if we extended those lines they would lead to vanishing points as well. We want to use lines or leading lines in our photos to create the illusion of depth. Photos only have 2 dimensions, height and width. They're not 3D, but just like a painting, it will appear, our subjects and our compositions will appear to be 3D because there's the illusion of depth. For instance, this dock makes it appear that this photo is 3-dimensional. If we extended the dock out, it would lead to a vanishing point. So we're using the idea of vanishing point in perspective here to give the impression that the photo is 3-dimensional. I really like this photo. We've seen it before, but I really like it because right behind her is the vanishing point for so many of the lines in this picture. If we extended the line of the bench out, the lines of the building, lines of the sidewalk, even the lines in the power poles here, the telephone lines, all of these lines converge out in the distance behind her to a vanishing point, which all adds to the sense of depth or perspective in this shot. Excuse me. There we go. In this case, again, we're using the dock to create the impression or illusion of depth. But notice how the dock as a leading line leads our eyes to another subject that's in this photo, which is the biker there. Now, what is the subject in this photo? Is it the biker? Is it the dock? Is it the sea? Sometimes it's hard to make the call, what is the primary subject? In this case, I'm thinking the dock or the pier here is just as much the subject as the cyclist, if not more. But I am trying to reveal that using lines in your photos does create the illusion of depth. In this case, it's not hard to tell what is the main subject or what is the positive space. This is a very common look here with the railroad tracks in the background. A lot of senior photos I've seen use those railroad tracks, and one reason it's such a popular technique or popular background is those tracks are very powerful leading lines. They're used to direct our attention to the subject. Here's another example of a tunnel covered bridge, it looks like, and the lines of the bridge in a lot of different places could be said to be leading lines leading us to our subject. In this case, we have 2 types of lines. We have lines created by the arms, but we also have an implied line or invisible line. His eye line looking at her, she is the primary subject. We can say that because his clothes kind of match in with the background, a little bit darker, but she's the brightest, largest part of the frame. She fills up the most space as positive space, and his eye line looking at her leads us to our main subject. So leading lines are very powerful. Here's another example of lines creating depth that one of our students took. What makes this so successful is they have the camera very close to one of the cables here and looking up at a extreme angle from down to up, so they must be kind of sitting on the floor taking this picture angled up, so it really worked well to create that impression of depth. You could say that the sidewalk line here leads us to our subject. Her arm and her legs also are pointing to her face, and so even the position of her body lines are helping out. Even though I think the background is kind of distracting here, with all of these lines, these two columns here kind of frame her in, and the line of the tree helps frame her in. Here's kind of a cool spiral line leading us all the way through. Our eyes kind of move in a circular fashion, and that's always a good trick or technique by a photographer to get the eyes moving through the picture. Here are the hallway lines. There's a ton of them. The lockers, the lines in the ceiling, along the floor, and even her legs and arms point back to her very successfully, even though there's a lot of distractions in the background. Powerful line looking up this skinny tree, or yeah, it looks like a tree. Example of a line of the sign, line of the shadows. All right, so these are some terms that we've talked about. Emphasis, which is the creation of a focal point, happens through how you use the different elements, especially a line is a good one. Focus, frame, and shoot, simple portrait, positive, negative space, control the background, upside down test, leading lines, and your subject should all be familiar terms now. If not, please see me or talk to one of your classmates. All right, let's move on to shape. Shape can be demonstrated many different ways. I'm taking the angle or the approach that how you use your environment to frame your subject, how those things in the environment that we call shapes can help frame your subject and give your subject more emphasis. Now here's a shape created by fingers and by the feet, but you can create shapes like this. But I'm thinking of how you can use shapes out in your environment to frame in your subject. So the shape of the tree on both sides creates a framing effect, framing in your subject. The sidewalk is really a big shape that's used as a background to highlight the subject. A shape put in front of the subject so the eyes stand out is using a shape to frame your subject. Shooting through a piece of playground equipment to frame your subject is kind of a cool idea. So you can even use your hands like this and maybe put somebody on the other side to frame a subject. So there's lots of ways you can say shapes can be used to help with your photography. All right, well that was I guess only shots 7 through 9. We'll continue with shot number 10 next time.